Hello, everybody. On today's show, we have Jacob Gerhardt. Welcome, Jake.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Jake, I've been excited about this because I've known you for a few years. We talk about a lot of topics, including specifically teaching. Now, I met you at a little tiny, little cute little school that a lot of people don't even know is even there. It's no longer operating as a school per se, but for many years it was. It's on the corner of Franklin and La Brea. It's called Aviva, or it was Aviva High School. And I guess my first question to you is, what was it like there? What kind of experience was it for you coming from where you came from, coming right in there?
Well, it was eye-opening. It really was. I saw a lot of things in Philadelphia, but this was entirely anybody who went to this school had issues. They were not allowed back in a regular school, or they were in juvenile hall, or they were part of the system, DCFS. So we came in, we had kids that were immediately and every day dealing with recent trauma. And the trauma could have been from last night or over the weekend and things like that. So we were, it was a very, very interesting place and things that I will never forget. Uh,
Yeah, and for those of you uh, who don't, obviously most of you don't know, but Aviva would be under the NPS, non-public school, and it's most of the students have IEPs. They're in a small group setting, and you have a teacher TA in each class, but the class doesn't go past 12 students. I mean, and often they're much smaller than that. And so you have a lot of support, a lot of staff ready for anything to happen. And that's the environment in which I walked in one day, and there was Jake, along with a lot of other teachers. And am I am I correct in when I say this, Jake, that as small as the school was, as unknown to many people as it was and is, weren't there a lot of interesting characters there and strong teachers?
yeah, yeah,
What?
really. You had to be dedicated to stick around.
Yeah.
To stick around as the staff who work there. You had to be dedicated. You had to have a belief that you were doing something that was helpful, even if the kids didn't see it at that moment. So yeah, there was a tremendous amount of talent there in terms of people um, giving their all, and also always trying to do new things to try to teach the kids. You remember transition? We
Yes.
used to do a class on, I don't know why we thought this, we would do it on Friday afternoons, and it was the only time. It was a different class for the rest of the week. So if a kid could get into a groove and know what was going on, it was a lot easier. Fridays were already stressful because they were going home or they were not going home. They were angry if they weren't. They were um, fearful if they were. And so we were teaching this class, and it was, we had to teach them all kinds of life skills things. And Ruben, and we always would switch up with a new teacher. And, we would start talking about it on a Monday, what we were going to try to do on Friday. And sometimes it did not go over well. And sometimes it worked, but we were always trying. We're always trying new things.
Can I ask you something, Jake?
Yeah.
When you came into the program, I mean, what made you want to do that? Because I get, we talked before, I don't think you're from California. I mean, what made you come over here, and then what made you go into this program? That
I was
seems like
living
tough.
I was living in Los Angeles, and it was the job that I got when I came out here, and then I just kind of fell into it. It was what I did. It was my job. It's how I made a living, and I didn't spend a lot of time looking for other jobs. I really, I became a special ed teacher, and then but I wasn't going in. And so, it was definitely something. Anybody who's working there was a little bit different too, because there was less pay. So you weren't getting paid a lot of money. But there was a little bit once you were out, you were pretty much done. There wasn't anything to grade. There wasn't anything. There were IEPs, which were a pain, but and I was writing and doing some other things. So it afforded me the opportunity and the time to do some other things.
Okay.
Whereas when I taught in Philadelphia, I was putting in a 50, 60 hour week. At Aviva, it was just those 40 hours, bing, bang, boom. And then I was done. So,
Very
yeah.
good. Back to your earlier point about transition, the idea of transition is life lessons, social skills for students as they transition out of high school. Will they be ready? So there would pair up teachers through the years to teach these classes. And so one year it might have been more than a year, Jake and I were paired up. It was the most seamless co-teaching experience I think I've ever had, because I've had several since then. And it was we just knew what you were going to say. We had it planned out. We would be so passionate about it. We'd be so excited about it. I'm not used to working with somebody like that. I mean, I love that. And it was somebody who's even more passionate than me. It was a highlight for me at Aviva. I want to talk about your background for a moment. I noticed that family means a lot to you. So every time I talk to you, one of the first things Jake asks me when we meet up, how's your family? How are your parents? How are your brothers? This is what Jake asked me. And he has a strong family. Talk a little bit about how your family influenced you growing up, Jake.
Well, it was very, very close knit. My father was a police officer and a detective. So it was an interesting upbringing in that regard. My father knew everything that was going on in the town, which was not necessarily the best thing. He knew the bad, and in that type of world, you're not dealing with anything that's positive. And it was kind of a little bit like at Aviva. We were trying to help kids get out of Aviva and go to another school, which was kind of depressing to think, oh, I want to do everything I can so this kid can get out of here. But, everything in my family, I have 4 sisters, 2 older, 2 younger, and a brother who's 8 years younger than me. And it was just something that was, from day one growing up, that was something important. Dinner together, respecting each other, having fun together, joking when you can. But it was just, I can't imagine life without that. And I feel sorry for anybody who doesn't have that. I don't like it. I think it helps in terms of a key to success. I really, really believe that. And it's the facts kind of bear it out. It's not to say that somebody can't be successful if they don't have, this perfect upbringing. Obviously that's not the case, but it certainly helps. Certainly helps. And having stability at home. A friend of mine who did a one-man show, he's something that always made me laugh. He was kind of describing, he said, this is my childhood. It wasn't bad. And he said, when we would have chicken at night, the next day my mother would make my lunch and it would be the leftover chicken. And he said, she gave me a little packet of salt and a little packet of pepper. And he's like, what could I say? My mother loved me, and that's okay, so I had that, if I left my lunch at home, my mom or dad would bring it to the school, usually my dad, and my mother made my lunch every night and wrote my name on the brown bag. I mean, I was embarrassed when I was in middle school, but when I was in high school, I liked it. It was kind of like, hey, I can, that's all right. So
Jake, your little story here is only inspiring me to call my mom and my dad tomorrow. I will do both. Sometimes I just forget. A week will go by or more. Okay. I'm gonna ask you another question about an Aviva student. But before I do, I probably have a story that I tell the most. Like when people ask me for a story, I probably tell them this one the most. And it involves you. This is the story. Story time. Jacob and I have probably one of our most popular non-interview videos is one called Story Time, where we tell stories. It's got almost 200 views.
People like stories.
People like stories. Here's my story. There was a tirade going on in one of the classes, and I know who was yelling. It was Jake. He was yelling at a kid. It was mayhem, and I was like, it was like, you cannot talk that way in my class. And I've never heard him so angry. And I came past, do you know the story, Jake?
No, I don't remember.
I came past, and this was right when I was across the hall, right across from you. So I could just pass your door just to check in to see if there wasn't going to be any kind of craziness. Not that I thought you were going to do anything, but like maybe the student was throwing something through the window. Who knows? I just wanted to check in. As I walked past your room, you saw me walk past, and you were red in the face, and you came past the door where only you could see me. They couldn't see what you were doing, and you put your head past the door. You did that. And you walked past, and you kept yelling, but you were in full control. I tell that story to people because it reminded me, or maybe it even taught me, that I have to be in control. Even when I raise my voice, I have to be in full faculty here because these are students I'm committed to, and I can't lose it. And you were always in control there, and I appreciated that. So I guess you could react to that. Yeah. You could react to that, but you could also talk about a student that you can't forget from Aviva.
Wow. A lot pop in my head. There was one kid that was there for quite some time, and I always remember, you could read the background, why they were there. And there were, the stories were just horrific. The kind of things that if you saw it in a movie, you'd say that's not true. That can't be possible. A kid one time that she came to us through the police, who had called. She was swimming at the pool with her sisters, and the lifeguards called the police and said somebody has to come and look at these children because of the whippings on their backs. And how can I ever be mad at that kid? Mm-hmm. And she had a voice that was really beautiful, and there's a lot of anger, that kid had to deal with. And that's just one of many. But specifically, I don't want to go into anything right. Because I don't, some of them, they're, there's scary stories and there's happy stories, but there's a lot of sad ones because, again, I have a friend who's a therapist, and he works with a lot of college kids, and their trauma is 3-4 years in the past, and they're okay and they're safe. But the kids that we had there, they were not safe. They had no control. They tried to have control and they couldn't. They were weak. They were preyed upon. So yeah, pretty crazy.
Geez. And to me, that's a tough environment. And I've taught a little bit like that. Not as tough as that, I don't think, because that's more emotional and abuse like that. But when you left there, did you continue in education? Because I would think that experience, Jake, would have definitely, whatever you experienced afterwards, I think would make you even be better.
Yeah, well, Ruben always says, once you, and some other people that we've worked with, and once you worked there, everything is easy. Everything is easier. Yeah. So, when I left Aviva, I was writing. Oh. So that was awesome. Oh, doing that, having that process and going through with that. So I didn't leave for a different teaching environment.
Gotcha.
But anything is always going to be emotionally easier than what that job was.
Probably maybe helped you with your writing, just all these feelings, all these emotions you could just kind of draw from, right? So
yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Now, Jake, we're going to get to your writing right now, but before we do, I do want to say there was a lot of joy in those classrooms and outside those classrooms, including times when you took students in the van out doing ornithology, which is bird watching, and the music would be playing. I think you would play Perry Como to their utter agony, and you introduced them to things they were not familiar with. You brought them out into nature, and so there was a lot of joy.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
we want to remind people that as dark as it got for some students, uh, you reminded me that there was one particular student that could call you somebody who introduced them to Ronald Reagan and could have a discussion using Ronald Reagan,
Yeah.
So speaking of Reagan, you seem to have an interest in social studies. That seems to be your area of strength, although I know that you also delve into other subjects. Is there a period in history that you most enjoy teaching?
Just about every aspect of American history, I really, really enjoy teaching. Once I'm into it, you fall in love all over again with a time period, or with with an era, or with a person. So I that's really my strongest point, doing the American history, and doing a lot of not just the political history, but the social history. A lot of this year I was teaching also English, and it was great to teach the Declaration of Independence, and then the Declaration of Independence, a wonderful essay by a professor at Johns Hopkins, Elliot Cohen, and then read later on Abraham Lincoln, and read the Gettysburg Address very closely, and then go about 100 years later, and read Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail.
That's powerful. Yeah.
And you see the connection. It's just right there. It's all just one thing leading to another, and then in the world history before that, going through Locke and the Enlightenment and things like that. So that's really something I enjoy teaching a lot, and I love doing the close reading of the text, especially some of the writing, some of the literature even. It's pretty cool. So that's really my best. But like teaching economics, especially today with the technology, it's so much easier than what it used to be. I use a lot of the Wall Street Journal news videos to go, and the kids can watch it and just pick out the definitions of what we discussed in the earlier parts. So that's pretty cool too. Yeah.
Okay, very nice.
I was just, when you were sharing, I was thinking about, I teach U.S. history too, so it's really hard when someone asks me what's your favorite period, because I'm like, well, I like all of them, but it's hard to pick. Although I did read a cool book you might like, dealing with Teddy Roosevelt, and his president came after him,
Taft,
and then the writers of the Progressive period, and it was written by Goodwin, the one who did The Team of Rivals. I'm not sure if you read that book.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting. It just, the whole world of the progressive writers is just so vivid, and she does a really good job describing that era. And I go, wow, I knew the progressive writers, but I never really knew them, what they were about or who they were. I just knew their names, Turnbull and Ida Turnbull, I think, and other people like that. Stephen Jeffords, or not Stephen Jeffords, but Stephen. That's name was Stevens. But anyway, but so that was a fun book. I'm not sure if you've ever come across it, but yeah, it's tough to pick a period.
Yeah.
Well, let me show you a book cover and a title, and I want you to react, Jake. I want you to react to this.
Yeah, I see.
So this is Jake's book, me and Miranda Mullally, and I guess, there's a lot to ask, but what was the best thing about getting published by an established publishing house and so forth?
Now looking back on it, the best thing was just having it dedicated to my father in the beginning, and then doing it and having my mom in the audience. That was really the highlight. But then just doing it here in Los Angeles and having my girls and my wife, come to the bookstore and answer questions. And so all of it was just, it's all just gravy, having that process go through. Somebody says, we want to do this. And somebody who sees it and gets it, because it is a comedy, and both books are meant to make people laugh, and not everybody laughs. And so the whole experience is just really amazing. And then, getting, knowing kids have read it, hearing back from kids, and even adults, and Ruben, you were one of the earliest readers of it, and you're somebody whose notes I still have, because of another friend of ours who is a writer. He reads stuff. He never gives me notes, because he's just like, yeah, cool. I like that. And I know he reads it. And sometimes you don't know if somebody wants notes. And there's some people who will give me notes and I won't take them because I know, it's not, I just say, hey, tell me what you think. But
Jake,
so yeah,
Ruben gives me notes too.
Yeah.
No, well,
yeah.
by the way,
Mhm.
Jake Gerhardt, unlike you, Jacob, Jake Gerhardt, when he asked me to give him notes, I asked him, "Do you really want me to give you notes?" And he says, "Please." I'm just kidding with you, Jacob.
Thank you.
But he really wanted that
Sure.
feedback. So kudos to you. And I will just say that this is a children's book, very funny and very playful. It was a highlight to go to your book signing, Jacob. And Jacob Gerhardt came to my school to give a little book reading to my students, which was really, really
nice.
cool. And by the way, I was teaching them presentation skills, speaking skills, and all the things that I was talking about, you demonstrated there that day. So that's a highlight for me. But
Jake, are you working on anything else now, or are you taking a break, or?
I have a screenplay,
Nice.
and I'm writing a novel right now, that is based on the screenplay. It started out as a YA book, and then I wrote it as a screenplay, and now I'm writing another novel of that. So it's something that I really like a lot. It's different. It's not humorous. It's dramatic. It's tragic.
Okay.
But I feel, and it takes a while to find out exactly how you want to tell. At least for me, I'm not one of these writers that puts out tons of books, but it took me a while to figure out how I wanted this story to be presented. And I actually, Ruben, you'd find this interesting, and Jacob and anybody else, but I decided that I really wanted to shorten all the paragraphs, and I wanted it to be a little bit, not like a Raymond Carver or a Ernest Hemingway minimalist, but just get that sentence and those two sentences. And there's little things that I find inspiring, that I kind of will keep in mind. For example, in Malcolm Cowley wrote about Sherwood Anderson, that Sherwood Anderson had the ability to sum up a lifetime or a moment in a sentence. And that's something that, that's what you want to do. It doesn't matter if you're writing a comedy or a tragedy or a history. You want everything in as few sentences in a way. And then once it's going, there's more and more and more, because hopefully the reader will want more. But so that's what I have been working on most recently. Yeah,
that's a really good piece of advice for most kind of writing. I would think, try to get it in there.
Yeah,
I like how you dropped Raymond Carver, one of my favorites.
yeah.
Now, I want to say you didn't introduce me to Joe Queenan, because we're both fans, but you introduced me to Closing Time. One of my favorite biographies. I, I should just do a book review on this podcast. Has nothing to do with teaching. Yeah, it actually does have something to do with teaching, just because it's so great. You also introduced me to A Drinking Life, which is also great. But if you were to contemplate 2 books you would recommend just for pure pleasure, what would those be? And I realize what a hard question that is.
Besides your own, of course.
Yeah. Okay. I have 100 in mind,
I know you do.
but I'll just put out. I'm reading this again,
Oh, yes.
and
Yes.
you're reading this, The Talented Mr. Ripley, and you're reading this, and the dude is a creep. He's bad news. He's a murderer. But she writes it in a way where you're feeling tension for him to get away, and it's just brilliant. So it's an amazing suspense story.
Okay.
It's an amazing cat and mouse, but it's also brilliantly written. So you can just, and then I've read this twice in the last couple of years, and I've taught it. A Tree Grows in Brooklyn.
Oh, I've always wanted to read that.
It's just marvelous. It's just so amazing. And I was teaching this book, and I'm reading it, and I'm crying.
Oh.
I'm crying. There's a scene that is so moving, and I look at my student and I said, "Do you see? I'm crying." And he said, I could cry too." I said, well, you can if you want. That's talk about powerful. But this is the story of Franny and her brother and mother and father, and it's a remarkable story. Franny Nolan. And sometimes a book like this can become this was one of the most popular books in the 40s.
Mm-hmm.
And a book can become so popular at a time that it can sort of get forgotten for a while. I guess that happens with every book. And but this is a book I always tell people everybody should. There's a part in it where she writes about getting vaccinated. And it's so amazing to think. And she writes, it's written here, only the ignorant feared vaccination. And considering today where people aren't vaccinated in wealthy neighborhoods, it's the exact opposite of what it was in those days. But of course, the vaccination makes the same sense. A fear of it, the trepidation back then is the same as today. I don't want to put that in my body. How do I know what that is? But it's just amazing. It's an incredible book.
Have you seen the movie for both those?
No, I have not seen this. This one has a French movie too, called Purple Noon, that was made in the 60s, and that's the one more with Matt Damon and the other people. But I don't even know if I want to watch it because I love the book so much.
Sure.
And I loved Carol that she wrote, and I love Strangers on the Train. But this book that she did, and she wrote another book called This Sweet Sickness about like almost a stalker. It's just unbelievable. I don't know how somebody gets that. What mind produces that? Wow. But it's really something.
Yeah, Jake, there's a top 5 website, top 5 authors talk about other books. That Patricia Highsmith shows up on a lot of true crime and detective novelists lists. She just pops up in that particular book. Pops up.
Yeah, I got to read it. Thanks. Both those books. I mean, I've seen the movie to both of them. So, but I got to read the book. So there you go.
Okay. So thank you for bringing it down to only 2. Because I know that's hard. Now, Jake, let's talk about the 3 greatest Philadelphia sports heroes.
Oh,
Go.
Bobby Clark.
I knew you were going to go there.
Yeah, just because that time, from my understanding, the Philadelphia sports teams were terrible. The Phillies in '72 lost 100 and some odd games. They won, I think, 56. That was the year Steve Carlton won 27 games. So the teams were terrible. The Sixers had, I think, 6 wins. And the Eagles were terrible. And then the Flyers came along and they just, grit. Hockey is a different sport too, in terms of, Philadelphia is a city where nobody would have played hockey, right? Nobody ice skated. Nobody knew hockey. It's a whole bunch of Canadians went in and wore those jerseys, and that town fell in love with them. And so definitely Bobby Clark. Possibly Nick Foles. I know that sounds crazy, but
Wow.
that 4-game stretch to win
big.
To win it all was just unbelievable. And then when it comes to the Phillies, it's interesting because the Phillies had that great run, but they were a quiet team. So the team that won the pennant in '93, they had Mitch Williams, they had Lenny Dykstra, they had Darren Dalton. That team got in a fight in spring training. They were fighting all the time. And then that run of the Phillies teams with Ryan Howard, who was that he had that remarkable run. Jimmy Rollins, who was as steady as they come. Shane Victorino, Chase Utley. But none of those players kind of stood out because sometimes it's taking it to another level in terms of being, and even Cole Hamels, who was their pitcher, who was the man, very quiet guy, uncontroversial. So it's kind of funny how people can be forgotten even with their greatness, definitely McNabb, P's up there, but McNabb was also a guy who was not, he wasn't, for, he just, these guys were like uncontroversial. So the greatest sports legends. Okay. Dr. J.
Oh, I thought you. Dr. J is great.
Yeah, but a lot of people say, Moses Malone came in and brought them to the championship. Charles Barkley was definitely a legend in that city. He just had I just read something really interesting that he wrote. His daughter's getting married, and there was Jewish ceremony. And Charles Barkley, about 2 years ago, gave a speech at a Philadelphia area synagogue. And he said, I really want to thank all of you. And he started talking about the people who, when he moved to Philadelphia, he had a lot of money, and he moved to the main line. And there were a lot of people, older people, men, who were really kind to him and also helpful in terms of how to live his life. And it was really an amazing thing to hear Charles Barkley, a guy in his 50s, say, and he said that most of these people are all gone now. These men were in their 80s and passed away. So Barkley's always somebody that I've always had.
Like no filter for him too, right? Sometimes he's so good.
He had no filter. He didn't then. He still doesn't today.
Right. I love that though.
Yeah. But okay, so what have I said? I've said Bobby Clark.
You gave us about 12, but I like it.
No, he's the two main ones though. Bobby Clark and
Nick Foles, and maybe Barkley
or Tug McGraw. No, I'm sorry.
No, maybe
I like Tuggy.
Yeah,
but those are all great. Maybe Dr. J.
Yeah. But basketball wasn't. Dr. J dominated the '70s, but it was the 80s that really basketball took,
Yeah.
became this huge sport.
Yeah.
Locally, it was the sports were local, but other people were just big disappointments, even though they were great. Eric Lindros was great at the time he was in Philadelphia. He dominated the game, but they never got to the top.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Knowing you, Jake, and our discussions at Aviva around sport when it turned to sports, I got a glimpse of the psyche of the Philadelphia sports fan, because you and I would argue. I don't know if you remember this. We would argue over Bobby Abreu, and I used to make an argument for Bobby Abreu that he was a great player, but you didn't care because he didn't embody something that was important to Philadelphia. That's what I drew out, and you're kind of hinting on it now, that it's not enough to be great like Eric Lindros. You got to bring something else to the table.
Yeah. Yeah. Abreu was on some of those unfortunate teams that couldn't get over the hump.
Yeah.
And he was on his own. I mean, that Ryan Howard batted with Jimmy Rollins, Shane Victorino, and Chase Utley in front of him.
Jeez.
Those guys didn't strike out. Jimmy Rollins was on base. So those teams were, so Bobby Abreu didn't have the same guys around him, and he wasn't a rah-rah guy. He was, but he was a great hitter, and he was another guy who didn't strike out a lot, so yeah, Abreu, that's so funny.
Yeah, we used to talk about him, and we also used to talk about another guy that you kind of had trouble with, even though he was great, and that was Mike Schmidt. So, but I know he had a championship there.
Yeah, he did, and but again, Pete Rose came in.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. That helped.
But Schmidt was, he's the best player of his generation. He's on everybody's list of the greatest.
Yeah.
But of course, in Philadelphia, people are like, hey, there was another solo home run.
Yeah.
I did a couple years ago, Jake, I went to Philadelphia, and I always have to visit the baseball stadium. So I went to that stadium. That is a beautiful stadium. Have you been to it?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I'm glad the Dodgers did some they upped their stadium recently, because there's some really beautiful ones out there, and that was one of them. I loved it.
I don't know if I love the Dodgers, but I don't know if that stadium will ever get to that level. In fact, any level. But I'll leave it at that because I don't want any hate comments.
No.
This has been really great meeting with you, Jake.
Yes.
Talking about teaching and other matters. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thanks for the book recommendations. I'm going to go for that.
Yeah. Summer reading.
Yeah, summer's coming. I'll do it.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us, everybody.
My pleasure.
And please comment on the two Jakes. And we'll see you next time. Goodbye.